Welcome to the Old Ways for the New Age podcast, where we weave the threads of traditional living into the tapestry of modern day life. I'm Hannah Forrest, a herbalist and naturopath with a deep love for plants, seasons, and the quiet rituals that shape how we live and care for ourselves. This podcast is an invitation to slow down and reconnect with the wisdom of the natural world through herbal medicine, folklore, seasonal living, ritual, astrology, and simple earth-honoring practices that can be gently folded into everyday life. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in. I wish to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I live and record, the Wanjerabara people. I honour their enduring connection to the lands, waters, and communities, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also extend this respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Hello everybody and welcome back to this week's episode of the Old Ways for the New Age podcast. My name is Hannah Forrest. As usual, I am your host and I'm here to chat to you today about building a really holistic health practice around the darker months of the year. The wheel has turned and we are diving into the underworld for a period of time, and so we will chat about how to work with herbal allies, how to incorporate slow living practices, and also really intentional nourishment this time of year for mind, body, and soul, for the whole family too. So thank you again for being here, and let's jump right in. So hopefully if you've been here for a while, you are familiar with the Wheel of the Year, but if you're not, definitely go back to earlier episodes on the podcast or jump over onto my Substack, where I have done an introduction post to the Wheel of the Year and then also some individual Sabbath posts as well. So have a look at that, have a read. But if you are unfamiliar, the Wheel of the Year is basically more of a symbol, like an archetypal symbol of a wheel that is meant to symbolize the way that the earth moves throughout the seasons, throughout the year. So we go from the summer through to the autumn, the winter, and the springtime. And this all ties back in. This is kind of Wiccan, like a more modern pagan practice. I think it comes from Wiccan roots. So it is a more modern invention, but it is just such a beautiful, tangible, visible representation of how we can live in alignment with the Earth's cycles as we always were intended to. So we can incorporate this wheel into our lives, and it gives us a way to conceptualize and really identify and embody seasonal living and how we can bring that into our homes in a modern day context. And so we have just passed Yule, which is the winter solstice. And so now our days will slowly begin to elongate. And at this time, symbolically, we are in the underworld. We are in the depths of the dark times. And there are a few different schools of thought on which archetype you could work with or which deity or pantheon you might want to work with. But at this time, a school of thought is that the king has been slain, the goddess is pregnant. So this is a time of percolation, of reflection. She's in the underworld waiting to birth her child. And there's different ways people think about it. Some people look at Samhain as the witch's new year, which is, basically Halloween time. There's an author I talk a lot about. Her name is Frances Billinghurst, and she wrote Dancing the Sacred Wheel, which is an incredible book, especially for my Southern Hemisphere witches. If you want to go check that out, I highly recommend it. And she discusses how the Yule/winter solstice season is actually the new year. It is the beginning of a new cycle. We're about to emerge into spring in the coming months, and that is, bringing with it new life and, rejuvenation and new growth and expansion. And so I kind of subscribe to that as well. So this kind of, for me, is the turning point where we're in the depths of the underworld. We are cold, it's darker, we have less sunlight through the day. And, hopefully through the autumn months, we prepared our home, we set protections, we cleaned our house, our space, and we are safe and secure in our little hobbit holes, waiting for the spring to emerge. And so now is just such an amazing time. It's an invitation to slow down, really take stock of what your priorities are, where are you going? What are your plans? What are your dreams? Are you feeling like you're in a place you want to be? What changes could we make? What what habits and thoughts are no longer serving us? Do we have any limiting beliefs we could release? It's that time of reflection and just nourishment and support. It's not a time to grow exponentially. If you are, that's great. But generally, archetypally speaking, this is definitely a time to be slower and to be steady and to not take on new things, but to really make sure, do an audit of your life and make sure that what you're carrying with you into the new year is stuff that you need and that you want around you that's serving you to your highest potential. And so the first thing you can do for winter wellness is that exactly that, is to treat it like almost like a Mercury retrograde. How can I reflect, reprogram, reprioritize all of the rewords? How can I make sure that I have what I need and I'm no longer dragging behind me the things that don't serve me? So that's my first piece of advice for winter wellness, is just considering the season, consider the archetypes, consider the deities that symbolize this time of year. You could look into the dance of the Holly and the Oak Kings and where their battle sits at this point in time. You could look at so many different things in terms of mythology and mythos, but this is the time to take stock. And so then we can jump into what's the next phase. So we're in a time of percolation. We know that this time of year, everyone is slower and it's cold and there's not as much light, as I've just said, and our diets change. So, the things that we feel drawn to eating might be different. In fact, they probably will be. I know I've been heating up my lunches. I tend to be one to eat them cold, but not at the moment. Not only is that terrible for digestion, because you need that digestive fire to be really strong and roaring, and eating cold food and drinking cold drinks is not supportive of that. But also, it's just cold and I like cozy. And so, maybe you're heating your food up like me at work at lunchtime, or perhaps you are looking at things that can be cooked low and slow, that are easier on digestion, where our bodies are colder and they might be a little bit more sluggish. Our digestive fire might not be as strong, so we want to support it by eating things that are cooked low and slow, that are partially pre-digested, that are easy on the digestion for us to break down, so we can assimilate those nutrients and keep ourselves healthy and strong through the winter months. Things like this might include curries, stews, soups. If you're a meat eater, you might want to start including an acid when you're cooking your meat. So if it's not in like a soup or a stew, sometimes people will include like lemon juice or apple cider vinegar with their meat before or during cooking to help to sort of pre-digest the meat, because meat can be really intensive for our digestive systems and it can take us a long time to break it down. So to assist our bodies, we can use these acids to break down the cell walls a little bit quicker and help us to use those nutrients in a better way. We might be looking at things like broths and those kinds of warming drinks. We might want to avoid our iced coffees. We might want to avoid definitely cold water. We might want to incorporate, a turmeric latte would be delicious. I love my cacao with maybe some cinnamon, like a warming spice. And so helping our diets to match the season, and also incorporating the things that grow this time of year that we have access to, that have been in food storage. Historically, that's what we would have done, things that we could preserve or things that could be kept cool and kept fresh for the winter. So this is a lot of root vegetables, for example, maybe some sauerkraut, kimchi, things that could be stored, pickled stuff. And so we could be looking at all of these things to incorporate into our diets, and maybe just giving the salads not an entire miss, but maybe we could do a bit of what you call raw fusion, where maybe you have, a bit of a salad base, but you're incorporating like your vegetables roasted on top with maybe some cooked meat or cooked protein of your choice. I obviously don't eat meat, so I love like roasted chickpeas or tempeh, or like I love a little tofu roast. That's just, my guilty pleasure. I like to make a little maple Dijon mustard glaze for like a tofu roast, and that is delicious. But having our protein cooked thoroughly, cooked with warming spices, and, you know, maybe also incorporating some really well prepared grains like farro or brown rice or quinoa into our salads and having them sort of warm. That's a really nice way to, if you're a salad lover, still get that in and still have the thing that you enjoy that feels really good for your stomach, but, you know, in a way that's kind of winter assimilated. And then, of course, like toasted nuts and seeds on that is absolutely delightful too. And then you could do a dressing with like an apple cider vinegar base. An apple cider vinaigrette is one of my favorite ways to do a dressing, and that's going to be supportive for digestion as well. So that's what we can look at when we are considering our diet this time of year for promoting winter wellness. And I hope that that has inspired you a little bit to get creative. The next thing is, of course, our beautiful herbal allies. And I know that so many of you still, to this day, one of my most listened to podcast episodes was the one that I did. Now, what was it? It was rosemary and thyme, I think. I did 2 winter herbs, and I did them actually for autumn, and everybody still to this day loves that episode. And so, you know, of course, the winter months, there are flu bugs going around, cold bugs, there are all sorts of kind of nasty illnesses we could contract that we don't have time for that, and nobody wants that. So especially if you have a family and that can spread through families, nobody wants that. So our herbs can be such a beautiful support to help us through these colder months. And of course, one of my all-time favorites, if you have dabbled in herbalism at all, even if you haven't, you've probably heard of elderberry. And elderberry is our antiviral like powerhouse. And of course, elderberry has so many other gifts to offer us. You know, they have antioxidants, and you know, elderflower can be supportive for fevers, and it's in the famous Yep tea, which is yarrow, elderflower, and peppermint for those who are having trouble breaking a fever. You know, elder can be worked with in so many different ways, but of course, it's such a potent antiviral agent, and you know, they can really come in and support us in even like a food as medicine type of way. So by that, I mean, one of my favorite ways to work with elderberry in this time of year is in the form of elderberry syrup. And it's something the whole family can enjoy. You basically just make a decoction, which is like you brew for a very long time, kind of boil for a period of time. The elderberries, dried elderberries, in some water. Sometimes you can add spices. Sometimes I like a vanilla bean. You can do orange peel and cinnamon and clove for like an almost like apple cider mulled wine kind of fruit cake kind of flavor. There's so many ways you can incorporate other herbs into it. And I've also seen people incorporate things like astragalus and other almost more like Chinese TCM herbs into the elderberry, and that's a nice idea too. I've seen people do licorice root with that, so you can really get creative. I made a cough syrup with elderberry and elderflower and a few other things, thyme, chamomile, marshmallow root, into like a DIY cough syrup when my husband was sick a couple of months ago in autumn, and that was great. And so basically back to the syrup is you make your decoction with your spices, and then you strain it off, let it cool, and mix it with raw honey or maple syrup for this amazing kind of spiced elixir. And you can take a tablespoon a day, you can mix it into drinks, but I just honestly, we have ours straight off a teaspoon or a tablespoon. And you can have that maybe like 2 to 3 times a day if you want, or just 1 tablespoon a day for maintenance. And that can help to stave off any nasty bugs you might be coming across. I, of course, love my astragalus as an amazing preventative. It's a bitter herb, but again, it is better as a preventative. So, especially if I'm traveling, I always take astragalus for the couple of weeks leading up to the full time I'm away. And then when I come back for like a week or 2, I will take astragalus that whole time. I actually personally use the Astragalus 8 formula by Fusion Health. I can't remember if they've renamed themselves, but you can get it from pharmacies. I can order it for you if you would like. I can set you up with an ordering portal so you can order it to your home. It's great. It's a traditional Chinese medicine formula, and it has a bunch of other stuff in there too. But that one has always been an amazing preventative for me for illness. And then you've got andrographis, which is one worth mentioning. And I've been intending to do a podcast, sorry, not a podcast, a blog or like a newsletter about this for some time, maybe a podcast, on the difference between andrographis and astragalus, because I think sometimes people get them a little confused. But andrographis is what I would use if you were kind of acutely sick. Most people know the supplement called Armourforce by Bioceuticals. But I do find, or what I was told by lecturers during my time in study, was that it can tend to be a little bit more on the suppressive side. So it's actually, it does work incredibly quickly and incredibly efficiently, but it's not my go-to, my number one go-to if I have just come down with like a little cold. I tend to go more for my elderberry, my ginger, other immune supportive herbs, thyme, rosemary, turmeric, rather than andrographis. But that one is great to know about. It's the king of the bitters. I think a couple herbs kind of have that title, but andrographis really takes it to another level with the bitterness, and yeah, it's incredibly potent antibacterial, antiviral agent. So I don't work with andrographis a lot, but it is there, and you now know about it if you didn't before. But of course, our everyday culinary spices are amazing this time of year for supporting immunity. So you've got garlic, ginger, chili, turmeric, all of these plants. They are aromatic digestives. They are warming in nature. They go in things like fire cider, which again is like such a potent antiviral, antibacterial, like kind of, get rid of all the nasties, go in and clean things up kind of remedy. And it's such an old folk tradition to make it. You basically infuse apple cider vinegar with all these amazing aromatic potent herbs, and you let it sit for a month or so and strain it off. And it is like, it's called fire cider because it's like drinking fire. And you take a shot a few times a day if you're feeling sick or you are sick, or you want to try to prevent sickness, although it is very strong. So just proceed with caution. This is not one that most children will probably enjoy, but I do know that Kat from Everyday Empowered, who we've had on the podcast last season, she actually does have a recipe somewhere for a fire cider for children. So that is something worth going over to her page and finding that resource, because that's something that I'll definitely make for Finn when he's a little older. Some of the actions you'll be looking for winter herbs are, of course, antibacterial, antiviral, but also things like mucilaginous, like slash demulcent. So your kind of herbs that are going to create that reflex reaction in the lungs if you have a respiratory issue or condition. So things like marshmallow root, it's really beautiful. Slippery elm can do that. There are many plants that have this quality to them. Marshmallow is, of course, one of my favorites. And you'll also be looking for things that are, again, aromatic digestive. They're going to support our digestion so that we can get the most nutrition out of our food. That's going to help to support our immune system, energy production, hair, skin, and nails, all of these things. You might be looking for something that's a little bit of a circulatory stimulant to help to keep you warm and get that blood pumping this time of year. And things like that might include, like rosemary is an amazing circulatory stimulant. It also supports the liver. So, rosemary can be an amazing ally to include this time of year. Or if you know me, really any time of year. Rosemary also influences our cognitive function. And so, all around, I just think you can't go wrong having a little bit of rosemary in your diet. And again, such an amazing culinary herb that has so many gifts to offer us in the medicinal department, but also tastes amazing, and you're going to be able to include it in all of your beautiful low and slow cooked soups and stews. You might be looking for a herb that potentially has a more immunomodulating effect, which, that is, you've got different categories. So you've got immune stimulating, which we do have to watch. I think everybody is so obsessed with getting quick results that we can tend to lean towards actions like that are stimulating actions. So andrographis is one of those plants that has that stimulating action. If you're looking at more kind of adaptogens, Panax ginseng tends to be one that people go for because, yes, it's going to give you energy. But but it can be too stimulating. And you have to think that your immune system is on all the time. It's running all the time. And so sometimes what it needs is a bit more support or moderation, modulation, rather than push, push, push. Because we know when we push, push, push our bodies, even our minds, we can lead to burnout, right? We can end up in that burnout spot. And the same thing can happen to our immune systems. They're not immune to that. Haha. Somebody stop me. But I think an immune modulator, might be echinacea, for example. And that's an amazing preventative herb. But the research does show that, people used to use it as their go-to for when you get acutely sick. So you've actually come down with a cold or flu. However, we now know that, and I think folk herbalists kind of always knew this, that it is more effective before you actually contract an illness. And then, of course, your echinacea also has another amazing winter wellness herbal action, which is a lymphatic, something that helps to support and stimulate lymphatic movement. And our lymphatic system is like our body's rubbish disposal system in some ways. And if you've ever seen a photo of your lymphatic system over the top, of your circulatory system and all of your veins and arteries, they basically look very similar. So we have these little channels running all through our body where our body removes dead cells, dead viruses, any metabolic waste. But unlike our circulatory system where we have the heart as a pump, our lymphatic system doesn't have that pump. And so what helps to move that around the body is gentle movement and dry skin brushing, things like that, and sweat. So actually getting a bit of a sweat up. And so, of course, gua sha, again, dry skin brushing, lymphatic massage. There are lots of different ways we can support it. Rebounding on a rebounding trampoline. There are lots of ways we can support lymphatic movement, but some herbs will also help with this. And so echinacea is one of those. And of course, I would be remiss to talk about herbal actions that can be helpful without mentioning the famed adaptogen. So nervous system supportive herbs in general can be helpful, especially if we are going through a stressful time and, it's already affecting our immune systems and our overall health and well-being. But, everybody knows the term adaptogen by this point. Ashwagandha is, of course, the first thing that comes to mind. But there are so many amazing adaptogenic plants and fungi that can be really supportive through this time of year. And so one thing that I never go without is my mushrooms every day, always. So I like to mix up my mushrooms. I tend to take kind of a higher dose lion's mane on the days that I'm going to work. And then, when I'm at home, I tend to enjoy a reishi mushroom or a blend. And then if it is something like wintertime, I love like a turkey tail mushroom because it is just, it has those antiviral, even anti-cancer benefits. I really love what turkey tail has to offer. And so they are one of my favorite allies for sure. Tremella is beautiful just for that really nourishing kind of collagen building, hair, skin, and nail building, regenerative action that it has. And then cordyceps mushroom is one some people like, but I would probably tend to not use that so much in the winter unless you're, an athlete or something. But a blend can be great. So, include your mushrooms, those beta-glucan rich, immune modulating, supportive fungi, mushroom allies. And then if you wanted to, you could look into other adaptogens like, again, ashwagandha, or I've been loving Schisandra as well. But I think the last thing I want to talk about, actually not the last thing, but one thing that I wanted to mention was that the way that you formulate matters, especially in the wintertime. So when we're already running a bit colder, making sure that we formulate in a way that is going to support our bodies and not run too cold especially if we're already a cold constitution. Now, this is a topic that's huge. I've touched on it before. This could be a whole podcast series in itself, explaining how plant energetics work, explaining how we could start to understand what someone's constitution might be. There's so many different tools you can employ to help to figure that out. there's pulse reading, there's so many ways to kind of get a read on someone's constitution. But for myself, I know I run cold and dry. So for me, I really need to make sure that I'm not overdoing it on cold and dry herbs. So for me, definitely having that cinnamon, ginger, garlic, chili, all of those warming spices in my formulations, and making sure I'm picking some herbs that are maybe either warm or neutral to balance out any colder herbs like our bitters. So again, that Andrographis, astragalus, like those kinds of bitter herbs, they're cold. There's very few bitter herbs, like one or two, that can be both, or that have a more warming aspect to them. But generally speaking, bitter usually means that it has a cooling constitution. So that is a lot of our immune herbs. However, we can formulate them, for example, with ginger, with oats, with licorice, in ways that are going to mellow them out and make them, more supportive for our constitution, and making sure it's not cooling us down too much, if that makes sense. So again, pay attention to your formulation. And when you get started, it is really helpful to write down, like when we're in herb school, or, when you're in I'm a clinically trained naturopath and herbalist, we have to write down all of our formulas. And so when I got out of uni, I started to write down the energetics next to the plants that I was formulating, so I could see the balance of my formulation, of my mix, to make sure that it was well balanced, for the lack of a better word. So that's something you could try if you're new to formulation, or you haven't considered this before and this is now another layer you want to incorporate into your herbal practice. You could definitely look at writing down the energetics, even the astrological aspects. Like there's so many ways you could start to write down next to your formulation to see how it works together as a mix, and for an individual too. Some of the ways you might like to work with plants, other than in your food, like directly in your soups and stews and all the things we've already talked about, is of course, yes, decoctions, is as a syrup, as an infusion or a tea. You can work with them in a bath. You can work with them in a body oil, in a salve, in a dreaming pillow. You can work with them in meditation. There are so many ways to work with your plants. You could, of course, use a tincture. You could definitely use a glycetract. You could use powdered herbs, like with the mushrooms. I like a powdered jewel extract. That's my preferred method of imbibing my fungi. So, explore. You could do a herbal infused vinegar. You could do a herb infused honey. You could do an elixir and oxymel. Really, anything goes. But some of the extra ones that I should note for this time of year is you can make lozenges, and you can make pastils, and some of those other you can make a throat spray. Again, a cough syrup. There are so many ways that you can work with plants in ways that maybe you don't through the summer months, and that maybe are a little bit more season specific. So definitely those are some things you could consider for that application, especially when someone's got a sore throat. You could do a gargle if you've got a sore throat, or like some sort of throat infection. You can also use like a paint, which, is applying like a sort of tincture solution to, topically. So maybe even if you had like an ulcer, or a skin issue, maybe your skin is dry and it's cracked out and it's getting a little infected, then you could use a paint or a liniment or something like that. So, consider ways that you could work with plants that, again, maybe are a bit more geared towards the winter season. Of course, these cooler months, as we've spoken about, are an invitation to slow down and to take things one by one, bit by bit, day by day, and really sink in to moments of intention throughout these months. So, you could do this through journaling. You could do this through, making your cacao on the stovetop instead of in the milk frother, stirring your intentions in. You could do this by sitting by the fireplace. You could do some scrying in the fireplace. You could do some meditation in the flames. Not you in the flames, but with the flames. You could do some breath work. You could work with some flower essences. But again, this winter season is just a beautiful moment to take a deep breath in and a deep exhale, and really think about everything that you do. and why you're doing it, and how can you really take these moments of slowness to extract every little juicy morsel you can out of it in terms of improving your life. So, we don't just need to look at things acutely. We don't need to be chasing our tails all the time in winter. Yes, there will be illness. Yes, there will be maybe stress. There will be, maybe you are really affected by the lack of sun, or, you feel the cold and you find the winter season hard. This can absolutely be a time to look at prevention rather than just trying to treat stuff as it comes up, or trying to address things as they appear. So we could look at this as a beautiful time to start building our gratitude practice, to start reaching out to loved ones and building that connection, finding your community, getting out of the house, getting in touch with nature, trying to find the joy in being in this cool air and see. I think that's one of the greatest gifts that seasonal living and living by the wheel of the year, and having the observational practice in my spiritual practice of observing the world around me, the way that nature works, nature's cycles, and the way that everything is interconnected. That is the number one thing that has helped me build a gratitude practice like I never have before, because I am so in awe of the way that everything is so interwoven and how everything has a place and a purpose. So, I think hating a season, or really, really disliking a season is probably more of a modern problem. I'm sure our ancestors didn't love being freezing cold and having to chop all their firewood and things like that. But I think this detachment we have, and how we just want to I just want to fly somewhere else for the season, that is like a modern issue. Whereas if we can really start to appreciate why winter has its time, and that it makes the other times of the year that much sweeter because we get to appreciate things that we haven't experienced for a while, I think that is a really beautiful thing. So definitely in terms of your lifestyle and mindfulness practices, that there are a few things you could begin to incorporate now to set you up in a really solid place for when spring and summer do come, and you can really start to bloom straight away from there. Other things you might want to incorporate this time of year is going to bed earlier, cooking and eating dinner earlier, getting up and still trying to see. You can catch a sunrise so much easier in winter. And so it's still just as important to get sunlight in our eyes first thing and last thing, and to, still do our audits and make sure that we swap out all of our cool light bulbs for warm light bulbs, for example. There are so many different things we can do in our homes and in our everyday life. Making sure that we have really beautiful, clean water to drink if we can. And, again, upping our herbal tea intake. There are lots of different ways we can work with this season to harness it and really get the most out of our winter solstice season. I hope that this has been helpful for some of you. It's a bit of like a whirlwind episode, but I've touched on some of my favorite herbs for winter wellness. I've touched on some herbal actions you might want to look at. We've talked about some ways you could work with these plants. We've talked about food and nutrition. We've talked about intention and reflection. And so, again, this is such a wonderful time to take stock and think about what you would like to call in for the seasons ahead. And just remember, the cold months don't last forever, but they are a really important part of nature and of the natural world, and they're here for a reason. So the more we can do to enjoy them, sink into them, and get the most out of them that we can, the better. Remember that winter wellness is not just about one thing. It's not just about how many herbs you can cram in a day, or how many supplements you can take, how much vitamin C your body can handle. It's also about, connecting with your loved ones. It's about looking at it from a holistic place. How can we address every aspect of our lives to really get closer to our highest versions of ourselves, get closer to the person and the place where we want to be? One more personal ritual that I love through the winter months is, of course, candle making. If you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen I love making candles, specifically ritual candles, but any candle. I do use beeswax, though I don't use a lot of animal products. I do use natural, locally sourced beeswax for making candles because it is the cleanest for my home and for the air that I'm breathing. And so I do recycle my wax where possible as well. But if you're doing herbal candles, that's kind of hard to do. But a personal ritual that I love is making my candles. You can make them with herbs that symbolize the winter to you or symbolize light to you if you want to call in, you want to call in that light into your life and that warmth. You could make one dedicated to a deity, for example, Aphrodite, or, I love working with Bridget, and I actually also love working with Artemis as well. These are two deities that really came to me while I was pregnant. So I've been working with them on and off basically since I had Finn and since I was pregnant with Finn. So you could do candles that are, devoted to them, and you could put them on your altars for that deity, or just your altars in general. You can use them in spell work, in manifestation, or, you can just burn them because they're warming and cozy. And if you roll them in herbs, they'll crackle and pop like a fireplace. So that's really beautiful as well. I hope that you have, again, enjoyed this, that you've got something out of it. And thank you again. Just, I can't believe that some of you are still here and still enjoying my content. And I try really hard to make sure that I'm sticking to a schedule these days. I'm not perfect. I'm a one-woman show, and I have a toddler to take care of and a household and a job. And so my gratitude is endless for those of you who support the podcast. If you share it, if you've left a comment or a rating, I would love it if you'd leave a rating or review. That means so much. Or share it online or with a friend, just to get the word out there that we're still here doing our thing. And so, I'll catch you guys in the next episode. See ya. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Your support means the world to me, and if you have a free moment and would like to leave a review, a comment, or a rating on your platform of choice, that would go a long way towards helping me to grow the podcast and reach more people. If you aren't already subscribed, check out my Substack newsletter. Over there, I share lots of free resources, as well as an option to join as a paid subscriber, which is another beautiful way you can support my work. May what you've heard today guide you in living a little more slowly and a little more connected.